Well, welcome everyone as you're logging in both virtually and sitting here in person. Welcome to CFES Brilliant Pathways 30th Annual Conference. And this year, it's a global conference. I really can't give our organization enough credit to be as small as we are in rural America and be one of the first organizations to have a hybrid conference of this size and magnitude. You know, we were fortunate last year with our leadership to pivot and go virtually so that we would share it. We hit records and increased audiences that we've never had before. Last year, we broadcast over 11 time zones. This year, it's even more than that. So on behalf of us at CFES Brilliant Pathways, we want to thank you. It's exciting for us because all of you that are in person or that are attending virtually will have access to all the recorded sessions of the entire conference going back into where you logged in for a year. So I wish I had that when I was in school. I wouldn't have taken as many notes as I did. I'd just go back and watch the teacher again. So new learning styles, the new paradigm. So where we are is the new paradigm for college and career readiness. You know, talk to Rick. We are in the paradigm right now. We're not waiting for it to start. It's happening. And we're hoping over the next 24 hours, we can define what the new paradigm of college and career readiness is. And when we wrap up, hopefully you all have a clear picture of that. So again, welcome. It's now my honor to turn it over to Bart Morrison, the chair of the CFES Brilliant Pathways Board. Bart is assistant to the president and a faculty member at Assumption University in Worcester, Mass. Bart, welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Ron. I'm humbled and honored and pleased to serve on the board of this organization and as its chair. I'm humbled and honored by all of the incredible and inspiring, committed, dedicated, smart work that all members of this community are offering to achieving this mission that we have, this shared mission. I'm honored and humbled by all of that work and our ability to achieve that mission year in and year out at ever higher levels of achievement. I'm also pleased to serve on the board and as a chair because of all of the wonderful other board members who are on, who serve as partners with me in such a dedicated and generous and committed way. And so I'm very happy to introduce our fearless leader who will give us an update of where we are and share some of his thoughts about where we're headed. Rick Dalton.
Thank you, Bart. I'd like to do 4 things this afternoon, although I have 17 minutes to do them. So if I start speaking really quickly, you will understand. I want to thank and acknowledge you. I want to preview the conference. I want to talk about the new paradigm and what that means for our children, because it means something different today than it did 2 years ago. I want to talk about that. Then I want to share our vision as an organization, where we're headed, and how we will help our children become college and career ready in this new era of ours. Let me introduce my colleagues on the board. Before I do so, Ray McNulty, who is our speaker tomorrow, is a board member emeritus. Ray, we're so happy that you're here, and that Ellen, we're so happy that you're here. You're such an important part of our history. So thank you for being here. Don Outing has a big job as a vice president at Lehigh University. He's a mover and a shaker in higher education. Before Lehigh, he was at West Point. I met him 11 years ago. And through that meeting, we created a partnership between CFES and West Point that helped thousands of our scholars become more STEM ready. So Don, thank you for being part of our board. Thank you for being here today. We're so happy that you are. So Bart goes back, and you're going to find this hard to believe, but a couple of decades in terms of art. He was 15 when I met him, at which point he was working for the Clark Foundation. We've worked together when he was heading an organization of island communities in the state of Maine. He's now at Assumption. He also is a mover and a shaker in higher education. And Bart, thank you for being part of the board, and mostly thank you for putting up with me. I know it's not easy to lead me, so thank you for that. James Carter, board member emeritus. I met James 20 plus years ago when he was the superintendent of schools, Selma City Schools. James is one of the icons in terms of leadership, not only in the South, but throughout our country. During our time together, he lowered the dropout rate in Selma City Schools by 32%. Those are good numbers. James, thank you for being here. Judy Kim is our most recent board member, and Judy, we're so happy that you're part of the board. Judy has been the evaluator for our Gear Up program, but she is a dear friend of CFES. If we have a question in terms of research, methodology, evaluation, pretty much anything, Judy's there to help us out. And Judy, I'm so happy that you're part of the board. Thank you. Stan Brown is a longtime friend. I knew Stan's wife, Leilani, when she was a high school student. I admitted her to Middlebury. That was a few years ago. But Stan is absolutely fabulous educational leader. Now heads up the North Side School in Brooklyn and provides all sorts of help. He chairs our audit committee and does a great job. And we're delighted that you're on the board, and thank you for being here today. So a conference like this and hybrid, hybrid really means twice as much work, because you got to do it for the in-person, you have to do it for the virtual. And the CFES team has stepped up to do not only twice as much work, but to do it really well. And I would like my colleagues on the team to please stand, and we want to thank you for all that you've done over the last 6 months to put together the twice as much work conference. It's going to be twice as good as any conference we've ever done before. Thank you. My colleagues, please stand. I want to welcome every one of you. And we have our newest cluster of schools from Wilmington, North Carolina. Would you please stand? We want to give you a special welcome. Yeah. Our North Country Brilliant Pathway program. If you're part of that program, please stand. We want to welcome you. Leather Stocking, the program, 13 schools, has been with us for 30 years. Would all of you from the Leather Stocking program, including Gary and Maureen, we want you all to stand, and we want to thank you for all that you've brought to CFES. Thank you, Leather Stocking. Our CFES Gear Up program, 7 schools in the North Country. Please stand. We want to give you a special welcome. And Tara, as leader of that program, thank you. And all of our other educators, our partners, our friends, please stand. We want to welcome you, because you can't do a conference, an in-person conference, unless there are people here, and you're here, and thank you for that. So please stand. So the slide you see is represents the logos of those many entities, many of them educational institutions. Lehigh, Northside, University of Vermont, Babson College, on and on. And because of our 25 sponsors, we were able to raise $150,000. And what that means is that instead of doing this at the Holiday Inn, we're able to do it at the Sagamore and broadcast it to thousands of people around the world. So thank you, sponsors, so much for your support. The conference. I'm not going to say a whole lot about the conference. You know what the schedule looks like, but I want to go back to some of what Ron mentioned. 17 time zones. So while it's good afternoon on Lake George, it's good morning and aloha in Hawaii, and it's good evening in Dublin. And Dean Garfield, who will be speaking in 15 minutes, I don't know what we say to him because it's 2 a.m. in Singapore. I guess we say thank you. But it is absolutely fabulous to be able to have this range, this global range that we're able to do because of CMI and the virtual approach. The number of people we reach, well, we may have 130, 140 in the Sagamore. We expect to reach more than 10,000 people. 3,400 last year participated in live time. In extended time, and here's where we put something on your shoulders. We ask you to go back to your schools, go back to your universities, go back to your businesses and make sure that your students and your colleagues participate in this conference. There is no reason that a young person in grades 6 through 12 should miss what's going to happen next door. The legacy of Don Outing, the West Point module that's going to take place. The cadets who will in session 2 talk about the essential skills. Tomorrow morning, the conversation that Missy and Dennis are going to lead about virtual interviewing and virtual college visiting and virtual learning. That stuff is complicated. We haven't figured it out. But you'll have an opportunity, and your kids will have an opportunity to hear from experts about how best to do this, how to make it happen. So a lot going on right now and for the next 24 hours, but it doesn't end there, as Ron said. It goes on. I want to talk about the new paradigm. Hybrid, we're doing it right now. You do it in your schools every day. It is so much more difficult, but I can tell you this, we will never do a just in-person conference again. It will always be hybrid because of the value we're able to bring. Virtual, it's here to stay. And we need to master it. We can't let it master us. It's an opportunity. And through our conversation, we can learn better how to do virtual. Higher education. And I got in touch with Don and I got in touch with Bart, 2 of the leaders in higher education. I said, help me out. And they gave me some great thoughts, but I'm not going to steal the thunder. I'm going to let the 2 of you talk in your sessions about the new model in higher ed. What I'm going to say is that from where I sit, and as I talk about the new paradigm, all of us are going to see the new paradigm in terms of different elements. It's like the essential skills. There aren't just 6 essential skills. There's 7, 8, 9, they're 90. These are the 5 that I see. And these are the 5 that I think are absolutely crucial for our kids as they become college and career ready. Higher education. What I see happening is COVID accelerated change in higher education. So much of what's happening was going to happen, but it would have taken 2 decades instead of 18 months. test optional, virtual. I love the equity that's part of it. And that was moved along, I think, because of COVID. And that's a great thing. The workplace, on the other hand, I think the workplace has been flipped on its head in ways that people never saw coming. Look at what's happening with employers and employees. 2 years ago, who was in charge? Who's in charge today? Employees. Look what happened last month. 3% of the working population quit their jobs. And they quit their jobs because they said, we're going to do it my way. And businesses are paying attention to this. Never has there been a better time for a young person to have a credential or a degree, because if you do, you can call your shots in ways that you never could before. I look at our family. I look at the son-in-law who designs, I can't even describe it, ways to protect bats from windmills. He used to, 2 years ago, have to travel, like you, Ray, 100,000 miles. He doesn't do that anymore. They come to him and they pay the same amount. So he's not going to Australia, or he's not going to Hungary, or he's not going to South America. He calls the shots. And that's what we can do for our kids when they have the credentials and the readiness to take on the challenge. Equity. Here's a trend that truly troubles me. I think that COVID has raised a great deal of difficulty for low-income kids. 2 years ago, there were 2 million kids, 2 million more kids enrolled in K-12 than there are today. It's because of COVID and the new era. It has changed the landscape of equity. Our kids are slipping further and further behind. Look at higher education. Community colleges, enrollments down 11%. Look at the haves. They've never been wealthier or in a better place. Colgate University, and we have a few graduates of Colgate in our audience today, was up 100%. That's an obscene number. I mean, Colgate's a great place, but up 100% in applications last year over the year before. The Harvard endowment is at $54+ billion right now. There is a huge gap between the haves and the have-nots, and it screams for the work we do. And as a result, there are a lot of things we're doing. I want to talk about the new website, and I'm hoping we can flip the slide. Thank you. New website is intended to help you and your students access what we do. This conference, we've created 150 new resources in the last 12 months for you and your kids. Virtual opportunities. Every week, we have 2 or 3 activities that focus on college and career readiness. And John Rydell, where's John? Where's John? Stand up, John, will you please? Back, John, wherever you are, behind that light, thank you. 10-point scholar plan. We've taken all that we do and all that we've done over the last 30 years, and we've condensed it, and we're saying we want every one of your kids to be part of the 10-point scholar plan. We want this to happen with every one of your students. CCR advisor training, and I'm going to end here. College and career readiness and the advice that our kids get can't just be from college counselors, can't just be from counselors, can't just be from people who wear the hat that says, I'm the one, because 0.01%, 0.001% of the people wear the hat. We got to make sure that everybody wears the hat, that all of us are going through CCR advisor training, that all of us who are educators, K-12, higher ed, coaches, clergy, secretaries, cafeteria workers, bus drivers, take the CCR training. We're making it easy for you. You get a certificate from UVM, and soon we'll offer one out west from the University of Wyoming. Take the CCR training once a month. And the CCR training has been a home run. Already we've helped and certified 1,400 CCR advisors, where our goal is to certify another 5,000 in the next 2 years. And the person behind this, our CCR leader, is Ron Ricks. Ron, please stand up. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all you do and all you're going to do. And we're going to turn things over to Tara, who's going to have a conversation with somebody better wake up Dean in Singapore and Amy in LA. Thank you, Tara.
Hello, welcome.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey. We could hear you, by the way.
Okay. Okay, great. Good thing we didn't say anything inappropriate.
So again, good afternoon. My name is Tara Smith. I'm the Vice President for Programs at CFES Brilliant Pathways, and it is an absolute pleasure to be introducing our opening keynote speakers. Dean, who was likely eating dinner in Singapore while we were waking up to eat breakfast, is someone that many of you know. He has been part of the CFES Brilliant Pathways family for many years. Dean is Vice President of Public Policy at Netflix. Acting as the lead lobbyist around the world, Dean works with local producers and governments to create rating systems for content and negotiate government interventions on production. Dean graduated from Middlebury College, has a law degree from New York University, and a master's in international affairs and public administration from Princeton University. We are grateful for his commitment to CFES and serving on our board. He's played an instrumental role in helping us become the organization that we are today. Alongside Dean, I'd like to welcome and introduce Amy Reinhardt, joining us from Los Angeles. Amy was named Vice President of Studio Operations for Netflix in 2020. Since joining Netflix in 2016, she has led global studio licensing for films, television series, as well as local language acquisitions from Latin America, Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and India. Amy oversees physical production facilities management, consumer products, and creative services, including casting, literary scouting, IP management, and music business development. Prior to Netflix, she was the president of worldwide TV licensing and distribution for Paramount Pictures. Amy holds a BA and an MBA from Harvard. Dean and Amy, we're so pleased to have you here with us today. As you know from our opening remarks, our conference agenda is designed to explore all of these elements of a paradigm shift around the rapidly evolving college and career readiness model. This is an opportunity to engage in dynamic discussions about this disruption that has shifted educational patterns and is changing our approach to education, to college preparedness, to career readiness, and technology around the globe. And there's no other invigorating, cutting-edge organization quite like Netflix. 20 years ago, the global giant was able to anticipate and then accelerate a transformation within the entertainment industry, completely changing the way we experience entertainment and driving technical innovations with a profound impact. The pandemic upended almost every aspect of our lives at once. In terms of education, it tested basic ideas about instruction attendance, testing, funding, the role of technology, and the human connection that holds it all together. A rethinking is underway. And there's an opportunity, this is our opportunity, to reimagine the entire landscape of post-secondary education and careers. So Dean and Amy, Netflix has always been ahead of the curve. And I'd love to get your take on how the new paradigm is reshaping higher education and the workplace. So where are we now? Where are we going?
Great. Thanks for having us both. Really appreciate it. Amy, thank you in particular for joining. I really appreciate you making the time. I can start, and then Amy, you can add on if you will. I think the biggest shift for us is we've become a lot more intentional in cultivating the workforce that we need to be successful. It used to be the case, at least my observation is, that we would count on other people to help to train, cultivate the workforce at Netflix and in many other businesses. And what I see happening at Netflix and in other companies as well is those companies and us at Netflix spending more time making sure that the people who end up working with us and for us are well prepared to be successful. Part of that is the work that we're doing to cultivate the ecosystem around us. Part of that is the leadership seminars that we advance within Netflix. And a part of that is actually reaching into the educational system and partnering with institutions, including a bunch that we've announced in the last couple of years, and including last week with Howard University, to help shape that workforce of the future. So we're not just accepting what's delivered to us, but we have a role in making sure that the students who come out of those institutions are well prepared to be successful and major contributors within the company.
Yes, and thank you, Dean, for having me here. It's great to be with everyone. I would just build on a couple of things that Dean said. One, I think that Netflix has, and Dean, you talked about intentionality, and Netflix has a very distinct culture. And I think one of our values that really lends itself to this discussion is curiosity. And so what we've always wanted to do is make sure we're feeding that curiosity of our workforce. I've had the luxury of being at the company for the past 5 years. It's grown almost 4 times from the time that I started. And myself and many of my peers are in areas, that we didn't start in, because there's just been so much opportunity that's come from our growth. And so again, going back to the curiosity aspect, people who succeed at Netflix have that curiosity and have the ability to follow up on that and see where their careers can go. I can tell you that specifically in the area of production, we spend a lot of time talking about global resources. And as production grows around the globe, there's a lot of competition for these resources, obviously. And so we are leaning in areas like visual effects and post-production, and trying to help the different countries that we work in, as well as here in the United States. We've got programs in place in Albuquerque, where we've announced one of our hubs, leaning into the education in these different areas of production, because we know it's going to be vital to our success. And there's just a lot of great opportunities in the world that we're working, and that we're lucky to be able to work. So a lot of interesting opportunities and ideas in the coming years as this area continues to grow.
And Amy, if you don't mind, both Dean and Amy talk a little bit more about the company values and how that has maybe evolved in the last year or two. But you mentioned curiosity. We talk to our students a lot about developing these really critical competencies, these skills that can be transferred into different spaces, especially in different careers. Could you talk a little bit more about what those values are that Netflix particularly values, and how that maybe has changed?
Sure. I'll talk to some of my favorites that I think come into play with my job every day. And I know Dean probably has a couple others that are his favorites as well. So one of the other primary characteristics and values is judgment. And we talk a lot about judgment day in and day out. You know, the ability to understand very nuanced situations and it's a very dynamic workforce, and it's a very dynamic environment where things are constantly being thrown at us. And so the ability to take a step back and look at all angles of an issue and utilize our good judgment, also in terms of picking new folks to come onto the workforce, right? And new employees. So good judgment is something that we are constantly talking about and constantly trying to nurture in the people that we manage. Another one that kind of goes hand in hand with that judgment is communication. So making sure, we talk a lot about, we have a phrase that we have at Netflix as part of our culture deck called context, not control. And so as managers, one of the major things that we lean into is, for the folks that we manage, is not trying to control their decisions, but giving the context and the background so that they can understand, again, sort of all angles of a problem and how to apply their best judgment to those situations. So those are the two that are, in addition to inclusion, which is you asked how we had changed in the past 10 years. And I would say inclusion is a value that we've added, I think within the last 3 years, one of the newer ones, but obviously one of the more important ones. So I would say those are three of the primary values that I see day in and day out.
Thank you.
Yeah, similar, actually. Those are some of my favorites as well. I actually took a look at our culture deck because we were having a discussion the other day about culture, and I happened to be one of the folks participating in that conversation. And then it led me in thinking about today, just to think about the essential skills that CFES advances, and there's a lot of overlap. I would say two additional values that are resonant and becoming more important, even more important to us. One is prioritization, and the other is adaptability. On prioritization, when you're a company in hyper growth, there's just a lot of opportunities and a lot of different directions you could take to continue to accelerate and advance that growth. Opportunities to get involved in sports or live sports, opportunities to get involved in more deeply in VFX, which is an area that Amy is very, very involved with, and hopefully we'll share some of that because I find that to be super exciting. And so, or gaming for that matter. And one of the things that Netflix has always been really good about is realizing that being strategic is not only about what you do, it's about what you choose not to do. And so there's a high degree of rigor and focus on prioritizing and staying focused on the things that are most fundamental and key to delivering joy to our members, which is a phrase that we use often within Netflix, which is one of the core skills that CFES reinforces. The second is just adaptability. There's a bit of a joke internal to Netflix on just how much we shift and move and make changes and change structures. When I first started 2.5 years ago, I wondered if people knew what they were doing, because it seemed every few weeks we were reevaluating and adjusting the structures within the organization. And critical to being successful in a place that's fast moving, where we are leaning into learning, as we say, and adapting based on that learning. We truly are a learning organization. And so to be successful, you have to be malleable. You have to be willing to shift with the organization as it evolves and moves. Amy made the point that for many of us, what we're doing today is quite distinct from what we envisioned even a year ago. And so to be successful, you have to be able to be flexible and adaptable, which is also one of the values that CFES reinforces.
So what is it that we do collectively? You're speaking to thousands of virtual participants and a room full of in-person participants, educators, people who want to inspire and guide and support and provide resources to students. So what do we have to do collectively to really prepare our students for the new paradigm and the evolution of education and workplace readiness?
Actually, I as you read a bit of my resume, and a part of it is that I went to a lot of different schools. But the thing that the connective tissue between all of those schools is they're largely liberal arts institutions that reinforce certain principles that stand the test of time. So I guess I'll offer two maybe contradictory answers. One is what you're doing. I mean, the CFES fundamental priorities around goal setting, collaborating, leadership, adaptability, those are values that I learned at all of the institutions I attended. And I would say I'm old. I graduated from most of those places 30 years ago or so. I think they're as resonant today as they were then. So I would say a part of the answer is do what you're doing. The other part of it is, which is the part that may be inconsistent or maybe just additive, is staying connected to and maybe my bias is just the worlds that I've worked in, but staying connected to the major innovations that are taking place in the world around you that are shaping the sectoral shift that both you and Rick spoke about. So in addition to maintaining the fundamentals, just keeping a pulse on what's happening technologically on the innovation front around me, and how can I stay attuned to that so I can apply those fundamental values to the world that's shifting around me. And I think with the combination of those two things, including for your educators, is maintaining the fundamentals, but also incorporating a sense of how the world is shifting, particularly when those shifts are significant.
Yeah, Dean, that's a really good one and a really important one. I think of even the communication tools that we use, for example, within Netflix, and how I am pushed on sort of a day-to-day basis to keep up with the workforce, and whether it's, seeing how Slack has changed workflows or how TikTok has changed the way that content is marketed. I agree that keeping abreast of all of these technological changes is really important. The other thing that I would say is just feeding into that curiosity of students. And, we have another sort of vignette at the bottom of our culture deck. And this is how we conduct ourselves in many of these countries that we go to when we partner on the production side. And it's the sentiment of teaching people how to fish, right? And not telling them what the answers are, but going on the sort of the journey with them, which I think is really important. We've been very cognizant as we go into production around the world that there are different operating standards, there are different workflows around the world. And we want to make sure, to Dean's point, that we're learning as much as we are hopefully bringing some of these innovations or bringing some of this technology into those countries. So I think that's just really important to continue to fuel that fire and go on the journey in some of these ways, and let let people navigate to where their interests are, and help open doors for them is really important. I personally in my life had a lot of mentors that were, I grew up in a small town in Northern Illinois who were crucial on my journey. And so I just think that's so important, to make those connections.
Thank you. And we've been talking sort of more generally about, how to prepare students and thinking K through 12. And I asked the question earlier about how the new paradigm is sort of reshaping higher education. Can you speak to that?
Dean, did you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, I'm now on the board of a couple of the schools I attended, and there are a couple of things that I observe. One is, which is, I think, something that we realized early at Netflix, which is just the power of connecting worlds, if you will, and realizing the bi-directional opportunity to learn from perspectives outside of the United States. So one of the things we talk about at Netflix is the recognition that a great story can come from anywhere and be loved everywhere. In higher education, one of the things that I'm seeing, at least in the institutions where I have a seat on the board, is just a recognition of the true bi-directional nature of education these days. And it's not just someone sitting at the front of the classroom speaking to students, and that there's much to be learned from other parts of the world in how to share knowledge and share it well. And so those two things, I think, are shifts in higher education for the positive. One is just leveraging the tools of technology to enable real exchanges. The point that Rick made about workers being increasingly in charge, the fact that students are a critical component of the learning environment, and so it's more bi-directional, is one. And then two is just leveraging the talent that exists outside of the United States, both for purposes of the student body, but also learning from those international environments.
Yeah, those are really, really interesting. I don't know if I have a whole lot more to add. I would just say, I do think an area that we're all grappling with, whether it's technology or education as well, is just the sort of manifestation of data and how to best use that data and adapt, because it can be overwhelming, the amount of data that we have access to. And so what is the best way to sort of adapt to that situation or that paradigm that data needs to be sort of processed through, would be one of the challenges. Yeah,
that's a big one for us as well. I mean, we at Netflix, we operate in 190 plus countries. And one of the things we work hard to is knowing the culture, cultural norms, people, levers of influences in those places exceptionally well. So we're seen as part of that place. And in order to do that, you're always onboarding a lot of information / data, but figuring out how best to turn that into insight that informs acting with intent is sometimes quite difficult. And so it's something that we're challenged by as well in our work.
Yeah, and I think being able to parse apart sort of the anecdotal from the data, as sort of real world events unfold, and understanding the impacts of that. And again, we spend a lot of time talking about this, whether it's how our content performs or issues that crop up internally with around problems, spend a lot of time kind of parsing that anecdotal from data.
Yeah, actually, that gets back to one of the questions you asked, Tara, on shift in paradigm and what educators can do to help students be well prepared today. And Amy alluded to it earlier when she said good judgment. But it is it's helping a student body and students figure out how to best leverage the abundance of the infinite nature of the data that they and we have access to, and then turning that into good judgment, because ultimately we rely on human beings to take that information and then make decisions that make sense for them, and ultimately that make sense for the company, and ultimately our customers. And that won't change. It will only accelerate the amount of data that we have access to. And so to the extent that we can train students to be adept at parsing through that, as Amy said, and getting to what's important, that's a fundamentally important skill to have.
Thank you. So we talked a little bit about, what you're all seeing needs to happen, or what, where we're headed in preparing students. And Dean mentioned you're partnering with other institutions, and really trying to help cultivate employees and support them and train them in a way that makes sense for all of you within Netflix. But what else is Netflix doing about this shift in college preparedness, career readiness?
Yeah, so Amy, do you want to start?
Well, I would just say it's an interesting question, because I think we're starting to just get to the inflection point of the size of our workforce where we're actually having to have a lot more internal discussions around this.
Yeah.
I think to the point that Dean raised earlier, because there was so much growth within the company, the development was coming from new roles and being put with new responsibilities, managing bigger groups of people. That was sort of the on-the-job training, and Reed felt very strongly sort of about that development approach. And I would say that as we mature and we've become a regionalized organization, and opportunities are becoming kind of more concrete, and there's sort of less growth internally for opportunities. It's a discussion we're having on a daily basis about how to better train not only the workforce that we have coming in, but what programs can we put in for graduates to help prepare them for the work that we're facing.
Yeah, the way I think about it is internal and external. Internal, it's what Amy said, which is learning and development was acquired through just doing the work. And so it was like you have a great challenge and take it on, and you'll become stronger and better at what you do. I think as Amy noted, we're realizing that is true, and we have to really focus on imparting that knowledge in a more intentional way, and more instructionally. And so are thinking about how we do that, and are actually building internal team that's focused on learning and development, which is a very new thing for Netflix. The second thing internal is we just didn't hire people straight out of college. We hired people who were like Amy, who were presidents at other places. And then we took away their fancy titles and made everyone the same title, at Netflix. And that's changing. We're hiring folks straight out of college in a way that we just didn't do before. And so that's, part of our internal shift and growth. And then externally, we're as parallel to that internal work is just figuring out how can we partner with educational institutions such that if we are going to hire people straight out of those schools, they're well prepared to be successful. And we're early in all of those phases, and so we're learning a lot.
Yeah, I would just say to add to Dean, I mean, I think we all realized internally that it was a little bit of our blind spot as well. For a company that deals in culture and really needing to be on the forefront and have our finger on the pulse of that culture, we quickly realized that if we weren't in tune with some of these trends that were happening with younger demographics, that was a disadvantage for us from a corporate level as well. So constantly learning and constantly iterating and being able to try new things and know when we need to pivot.
Thank you. So we have some time. I would like to welcome our audience to ask some questions if they have them. So we'll take a minute and see if there are any questions from the audience. I can come around with our microphone.
Amy, while we get Tara walks out to the person, I was hoping you'd share a little bit about virtual production, some of the stuff we're doing in Germany. I think it would be interesting to folks.
Yeah. So on the virtual production is a sort of new production technique that we're leaning into, and it's evolving, but it basically involves a convergence of game engines and production. And so the production that Dean was referencing was a production that we did in Germany called 1899, and we utilized, I think it was almost 5,000 LED screens that are on a sound stage. And we use technology to set the scene behind that stage. And so you have a couple of real tangible elements that sit on the stage, and you've got your actors, but the background is all dynamic and computer generated and changing in real time depending on the angles that you're using. And so this is a world that is rapidly sort of evolving. We're doing a lot of testing with this, as is the industry. It was a production technique that was used, for example, on The Mandalorian. And there are a lot of great opportunities around this and more to come. And I think it's really going to change the way that production happens in our industry, because think about the less of a need to go out and travel and be on location, because you can render whatever world you need within the four walls of a stage. It's really a fascinating area of technology.
Thanks.
Hi, Lee Maxey, and question, you have such a powerful platform, and when and how are you going to start doing education, micro pieces of content that, not maybe TikTok small, but micro pieces of content to augment what's going on in the schools? And you remember back 20 years ago when USA Today tried to provide newspapers to schools, but now we can do so much more, or you can do so much more. How could you see that happening?
Amy, do you want to take that on?
I can talk to you a little bit about because we did talk a lot about this internally when I was on the content acquisition side. And we're constantly trying new forms of content and seeing how it resonates with our audiences. I would say we also do quite an evaluation in terms of determining what content makes sense to be behind a paid paywall for our customers versus what content may make more sense on a platform like YouTube, which is more readily available across the world. And so I think you'll see us continue to try new things. We also, there's a lot of decisions that you can imagine go into these, a lot of discussions that go into these decisions in terms of like navigation. So how would we offer content like that? And being as we have everything set up in rows right now, how would we be able to serve that up to a wide audience in a way that it would need to be to kind of get traction? Because everything's being served through the personal algorithm, educational content, I think my sense would be that it would be quite difficult to, we'd have to do a lot of testing to understand how something like that could work. But those are just some of the things that have come up internally when we've discussed that type of content.
Thank you. Additional questions from our audience? Yes.
Thank you. One of the questions I have, excuse me, would be, what are those characteristics of being prepared for success? You started out discussing that is the preparation for success. So what are those characteristics that you look for or develop within Netflix? And then I have a second question or comment, and I think pop culture generates really from the college campus for us. I see it drives down to secondary schools and then from there downward to elementary, but also in the young adult workforce after college. But I think pop culture is driven by the college experience in so many ways. And I think you could look at that as far as one of the opportunities for driving Netflix forward. But I really am interested in those qualities of success that you mentioned.
I'll speak to one, Dean, if you're okay with it. One of the areas that I would say that we haven't touched upon with our culture, which is again, a sort of a fundamental piece of our culture is feedback. And so feedback is something that we practice on a daily basis. You know, a lot of corporations you'll hear talk about sort of 360-degree evaluations that happen once a year. And being at some of the other companies I've been at, we talked about it, but it wasn't really put into practice. Feedback at Netflix is the real deal. And so that is a primary way to help manage folks on your team. It is something that we give cross-functionally as a way to figure out, and when I say feedback, so that is personal feedback about interactions or how to best sell something in. It can be really anything, but it's all about nurturing sort of a healthy dynamic and balancing those tensions that happen within a company, pushing hard issues, but doing so in a way that is not offensive or doesn't, is actually helps move the needle in terms of the overall discussion. I think that's a really crucial and underlying part of development within our company. And yet there's a certain type of person who can give feedback and receive it. It really is an art, but I think the people who can balance that are ones that we have tended to see want to improve, want to know how to learn and get better, and seek that personal growth.
Yeah, you look at the Netflix culture deck and it seems great in theory, and then there's the practice. And I have to say, coming to Netflix, it took me a minute to get used to the feedback culture. One of the things that's great about it, and speaking of that town hall that we were part of on Friday, is there is no hierarchy to the feedback. So you could have someone who started 2 days ago giving feedback to Reed and Ted in just a very direct and pronounced way, and the response is thanks, and follow-up questions on how I could get it, how I can become better. It's pretty unique because I've worked with a lot of different companies and senior executives, and there's a certain hierarchy and norm to those engagements which don't exist at Netflix, and I think it makes us a better place. The one other thing I would highlight, because both Amy and I have global teams, is just a strong international/global IQ. It's as we expand into the world, it is insufficient for us to have a international sense of things. We have to have a very particularized local sense of what makes sense and what is entertaining in various places. And so having people who have experience, exposure to different cultures, different norms, different places is highly valued. I would say not only at Netflix, but at corporations all around the world these days. And so that's another skill set that I would highly encourage. And I know there's a certain privilege to being able to travel around the world. but there's a lot of learning that can happen without spending a lot of money. And so to the extent that you can create exposure for your students to other cultures, I would say there's a premium on that base of knowledge.
And I would agree about the comment around college culture and that being kind of the pulse. I agree with you.
Hello. Oh, geez. Sorry. Chris Wetzel. I'm a school counselor in a high school in Vermont. I don't know how to word this, but in more, I guess, recent light, Dave Chappelle's special, for example, there's content on Netflix that spills, that there's real life implications that someone like myself as a school counselor deals with on a daily basis. So being able to enjoy the content is one thing, and the educational value provides, as well as, comedic value. But there are real world implications, like Icarus, the documentary, Dave Chappelle. I'm working with students that come in that are having issues digesting that information. I guess, what are you doing within within Netflix to, I guess, help promote not only the content, but the social emotional implications that may be a spillover effect that are impacting local communities? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one that we wrestle with. I would say first, we fully recognize that entertainment does have real world implications. We don't suggest it doesn't, and so recognizing and embracing that. There are the fundamentals, like making sure that those who are our members, when they watch the content, have context on it. So we do that in a number of ways, including the ratings that we attach to that content. One of the things we're also cognizant of is that we impact the zeitgeist. There's a lot of conversation that comes from the content that we create, and so how do we not only leverage that, but contribute to that in a constructive way? Dave Chappelle, for us internally, has raised that, and we've been trying to figure it out. I think the most fulsome and honest response is that we're embracing the responsibility, but learning how we carry it out best, and haven't fully figured that out.
Yeah, just to add a little bit onto what Dean said, I would say that there has been a number of internal discussions over the last 2 weeks, and sort of fostering that conversation, a number of town halls. And I agree with Dean, this will be something that we'll continue to discuss and find our way. I think balancing again that we do believe in artistic expression, and we feel like that is a very important thing, and we understand that also creates tension. So how can we get better about educating ourselves about those consequences and those implications in the content choices that we make?
Thank you.
A question I have is just getting back to CFES. I'm wondering if there's a way, because you guys have a platform in which a lot of people can consume the things that CFS likes to do. Is it a possible way that you can look at a documentary that would follow a kid from a rural community and maybe an urban community, and then bring it together so that all the people in the world would be able to see how great the program really works? That's what I'm trying.
Sounds like a pitch, Amy.
That
What do you
wasn't
say?
a plan.
We're always looking for good ideas.
We do a lot of documentaries. It's got to be entertaining too, because that's fundamentally what we do. And so if there's a pitch for a way to turn exactly what you said into something that's highly entertaining, then we would definitely consider it because that's the business that we're in. And we do a lot of documentaries, by the way, and so it's not off the wall that we would do something that
And that
follows the education of the student, both from rural and urban communities.
So we'll follow up with you. So this session is starting to come to a close, but before we do wrap things up, one last question I have is just, there's a lot more conversation to be had about the new paradigm shift. That's one of the reasons we're all here. And as Rick mentioned earlier, there's a lot of elements to this shift. And I'm just curious what, at this point, what are some of the main lessons learned from your perspective that you'd like to leave our educators with and supporters of CFES?
I would say a couple immediately pop to mind. One is the work that you're doing today is as important as it ever was. We need the students that you're working with, and we need students who are from every background, both rural and urban. So that's one. So keep doing what you're doing because it's incredibly important. Two, the sectoral shifts, and Rick made this point earlier about accelerating changes that were going to happen anyway, but they're now here. I think the big sectoral shifts that have happened in our space affirm just the value of having kids who have the fundamental skills that you've prioritized, people who collaborate well, who are strong leaders, who are incredibly adaptable, who have grit and will persevere. And so the last thing I would say is, yes, keep a pulse on all of the sectoral shifts that are happening, but I would encourage you to double down on those fundamental skills, because they're equally resonant and relevant, and I suspect will be 5 years from now as well as 50 years from now.
Yeah, it's hard to follow Dean because he's so eloquent in the way that he can wrap things up. I just wholeheartedly agree with him in terms of the work that you're doing now is more important than ever in an increasingly sort of complicated world that only seems to be getting more complicated. And so the work that you're doing at this stage of those kids' lives is just so beneficial and so valuable. And I do think setting that foundation and setting that sort of compass is just the most important thing and will remain the most important thing.
Thank you. We are, Dean and Amy, we are so thankful that you were able to join us today and to share your fascinating insights, and not just from Netflix and kind of the internal workings and what you see coming down the pipeline in terms of education and the shift that's taking place, but also your personal insight, I think is so valuable, and hearing, what you perceive as being most effective in preparing our students for what's coming down the pipeline. So we are so grateful to both of you for taking time with us and speaking with us and sharing with us. And we look forward to this conversation continuing beyond today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. Thanks, Amy. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks for doing that. That was awesome.
Thanks, Dean. Oh, I thought Rick had something to say. He was just waving goodbye to Dean. Good night, Dean. Good night. I'm going to invite Ron Ricks to come up here and share some logistics of the agenda as we move forward. Thank you.
Kara, thank you for hosting that great conversation. It's so cool So cool. Listen how the real world is adapting and changing, evolving, and the value of the skills. Speaking of the new paradigm, CFES Brilliant Pathways has created one. This is our 30th annual conference. Never before have we started on time and ended the first session a little bit early. So thank you, virtual world. We've got an extra 5 minutes for the break. There's refreshments set out in the lobby for you. The next sessions will start promptly at 2:30. We will come back after those sessions for a quick break, and then we'll have the afternoon sessions. And then you can follow your agenda. We'll be back here for the evening program and a little hosted reception of beer and wine and soft drinks for you right along your schedule. So we'll see you in the next sessions at 2:30. Thank you, folks.